All right. Hey, everybody. I'm Oliver. Leo and I are going to present our proposal for research with a device that can teach people better piano technique. So what do I mean when I say better? Um, Playing piano well isn't just about playing the right notes at the right time, but it's also about, from a biomechanical perspective, how I move my body to actually press the keys on the piano. And the reason that this is important is because if you don't play with the right technique, you actually put yourself at risk of developing injuries, especially if you're a professional piano player or student looking to become a professional piano player who's playing for hours and hours every day. So some of the most common injuries that you'll see in pianists is tennis elbow or carpal tunnel, which are obviously afflictions of the forearm and the wrist. And they're pretty prevalent in people who play professionally or are training. Um, and so to decrease the risk of developing these injuries, the quote unquote correct way to play is to obviously play with the right posture. So that's in the back and neck and posture of the hands and arms. And then also to hold as little tension as possible in the body. So really you want to use the minimum amount of muscle activation that you can to press that key. So we looked for different tools that we could use to evaluate people's technique and ultimately try and correct it. And one of the most common tools that's already used in this field is surface EMG. It gives you a pretty clear picture of how much certain muscles are being activated. Of course, it has limitations, but it certainly suffices for this application. Researchers have been using this to help students understand, where they're activating their muscles and for how long, and they've actually been able to successfully improve people's technique by giving them this feedback, which is also called biofeedback, since you're using a biological signal. What's cool about surface EMG is that we can actually resolve a single keystroke on the piano. So I can see a peak in muscle activation just for one key. So I can, see a really small event on the EMG trace. There's also been research in wearable devices that are used to teach piano. This glove shown here is called the Mobile Music Touch, and it uses tactile feedback to teach people new keystroke sequences. So basically like new pieces of music. And they were actually successful in that people using this glove were able to learn new sequences faster than people who were just learning it the traditional way. So to look a little bit more closely about what we mean when we say good technique, this chart on the left shows an EMG trace for a single keystroke. So not only do I have a peak in muscle activation right when the key is being pressed, but there's also a steep decline after that. And that shows that once the key on the piano is bottomed out and I no longer need that muscle activation or as much muscle activation to hold it down, I'm actually releasing all that tension in my hand. So if I was, playing with quote unquote poor technique, that peak value would persist after the initial peak. And that would mean there's too much energy being used and the muscle is being overloaded. On the left, we see a diagram from a study where different wrist positions were being evaluated for playing piano. And like most piano teachers tell students everywhere, keeping the flat wrist is correct. But the study actually determined experimentally that holding the wrist flat versus extended or flexed actually has the lowest muscle activation in the wrist flexor muscles. So that means over time, I'm loading this muscle the least when I'm playing in this position. So these are kind of the two specific aspects of piano technique that we're going to try and look at with our device.
Yeah, so based on our background research, we came up with these two hypotheses, where the first hypothesis is the precondition for the second one. First is that piano players will be able to respond to external signals without letting the quality of their performance be affected. And secondly, the receiving real-time biofeedback will improve pianist technique by reducing the muscle tension and correcting the wrist angle. So we made a interview with a piano teacher from the Bay Area who started playing at a young age and has been training new students for several years. Similar to many full-time musicians, long time of playing instruments resulting in hand pain that hinders their playing abilities. Here are some main takeaways from the interview. Our interviewee told us about the impacts of the carpal tunnel syndrome. They cannot play for many hours, sometimes even for days. And if the problem did not address properly, the symptom could get worse and the quality of the music could also be affected. They also told us several techniques about the wrist angle, as Oliver mentioned, and also the tension, and also explained some of the teaching principles to us, which inspired us to come up with our design concept. The proposed design of this is a biofeedback piano training device that will help the pianist improve skills and prevent the development of new injuries or exacerbation of the existing ones. The device consists of two bands. The first is worn on the proximal end of the forearm, as you can see in the diagram, where the EMG sensor probes the activity of the forearm muscle. This wristband will communicate with the second wristband, which is actually worn on the wrist. This wristband will carry the reference EMG sensor placed on the head of the ulnar bone, as well as a small vibration motor, which will serve as a haptic feedback to the user. The secondary wristband will also hold an IMU, which will approximately measure the angle of the wrist. The microcontroller and the battery pack are be placed on the forearm band, where the weight will have less impact on the pianist's keystrokes. As we mentioned, we have two hypotheses to test, so we designed these experimental methods. For the first hypothesis, we first recruited subjects from a pool of piano students. I will give the device to them beforehand so they can get used to playing piano with the device on their arm. Then after they came to the lab, we'll test if the real-time feedback actually affects their performance. We will ask them to play a designated music score without any signals and let them play it again, but this time with the random signals popping up while they're playing. Then we'll compare the mistake numbers they made with or without the signals. Only the subjects making less than the threshold mistake can moving forward to the next stage of the experiment. So in the next stage, each pianist in the experiment will ask to play a designated score, a set of music scores with the device on and the feedback enabled. Pianists then playing with the same device, but with the feedback off. In all trials, the EMG sensor and the IMU will also be attached to an external data acquisition system. So even when the device is off, there's no feedback, we still can get the data on the pianist's music muscle activities. The amount of music played over one trial should take several hours, which should be enough to incite fatigue in the pianist's hand, and this is about the time that pianist making mistakes on certain techniques. So this will be the best time where the device intervenes and serve the biggest benefits. The device will be evaluated both by qualitative data given by the subjects in form of the survey scoring the comfort, ease of use, and perceived benefits, as well as quantitative data will also be analyzed to show the change in the continuous muscle tension, recovery rate, and the peak load between the experimental and the control trials. The experiment could also be extended to longer periods to investigate the long-term effects, such as playing behavior, as well as whether or not the change in the behavior persists if the device is not worn.
So Leo and I are really excited about doing this research because we've seen a lot of this technology been proven in previous studies, but nowhere have we seen it as like an actual consumer device. So, success in this research will help us bring this technology to lots of people and actually have an impact on people who are playing piano. Ultimately, if this device works, we'll be preventing students and professional players from developing as many injuries as they would normally. And hopefully it could also help people who have existing conditions manage their injuries and get back into playing piano more often. Ultimately, our potential success in this research will allow more people to derive a greater enjoyment from the art of playing piano.